The first sound I heard wasn't a voice. It was a pen, not talking, not crying, a pen clicking open and shut, somewhere near my hand. I couldn't move yet. My eyes were still sealed shut with whatever 3 weeks in a hospital bed does to a person. But my ears worked. And what I heard, before anyone knew I was listening, was my wife's voice, low and businesslike, saying, "Just initial here, and here. He won't even remember signing it." She wasn't talking to a nurse. She was talking to my lawyer. Part 1. How it started. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that I spent 11 years building something out of nothing, a logistics company that started with 1 truck and a spreadsheet, and grew into something that had my name on the door and 40 employees who depended on me to keep it running. I was 38 when I met Rachel. She worked in commercial real estate, sharp, funny, the kind of woman who made you feel like the most interesting person in a room full of people who'd actually earned the right to be interesting. We dated for a year. I proposed at the warehouse where I'd started the business. Cheesy, I know, but it felt right. She cried. I thought they were happy tears. I didn't think to wonder back then why a woman who worked in commercial real estate had asked so many specific questions about business valuation before we'd even set a wedding date. I want to be clear about something. I'm not telling you this story so you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because I need you to understand exactly how normal everything looked, right up until it wasn't. We got married 18 months later. Small ceremony. My business partner Dennis gave the toast. Rachel's parents flew in from out of state. Everyone smiled in the photos. In every single one of them, I look like a man who has no idea what's coming. Part 2. The accident. 2 years into the marriage, I was driving home from a supplier meeting on a road I'd driven 1,000 times. A truck ran a red light. That's the whole story of the crash. Unglamorous, meaningless, the kind of thing that happens to someone else until it happens to you. I don't remember the impact. I don't remember the ambulance. The last clear memory I have from before is boring, almost insultingly boring. I remember thinking about whether to get gas before I got home. Then nothing. For 19 days, nothing. While I was gone, Rachel became, by every outward account, the perfect wife. She sat by my bed. She posted updates for family. She held my hand for photos that other people took, because grief photographed well, and sympathy is its own kind of currency. What she didn't know was that comas aren't always silence. Sometimes they're a slow climb back up through layers of awareness, and the last layer, hearing, comes back before the ability to open your eyes, before the ability to move a finger, before anyone in the room has any idea you're back. I came back slowly, and on day 19, still trapped behind eyelids that wouldn't open, I heard her voice, and my lawyer's voice, and the word initial. Part 3. What I heard. I lay there, paralyzed, silent, invisible, and listened to my own wife negotiate the sale of the company I had built from a single truck. The medical team says even in a best-case scenario, he won't be functional for months, she said. I need power of attorney finalized today, not next week. My lawyer, a man named Peter Kessler, who I had used for 11 years, who had drafted my father's will, who had stood at my wedding, said quietly, "Rachel, I have to be honest. This timeline makes me uncomfortable." "He's not going to wake up and thank you for slowing this down," she said. "I'm his wife. I have every right to protect our assets." Our assets. 11 years, 40 employees. A company that didn't exist before I built it with my own hands, 1 truck at a time, 3 years before I even met her. She wasn't protecting anything. She was liquidating it. I heard the word buyer, an outside buyer, someone I'd never approved, someone who wasn't Dennis, who wasn't anyone from the industry I trusted, someone who, I would later learn, was already in a relationship with her that had started roughly 4 months into our marriage. I lay there and I could not move. I could not speak. I could not open my eyes. All I could do was listen to the sound of 11 years of my life being signed away in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and, faintly, her perfume. I want you to sit with that feeling for a second. Not the anger, that comes later. Just the helplessness. The specific, total helplessness of being fully aware and completely powerless, in the same body, at the same time. Part 4. The first movement. It took 4 more days before I could move my hand. The first thing I did with it, the very first thing before I reached for a nurse, before I tried to speak, was press it flat against the blanket, over and over, testing whether it was real, whether I was really back. The second thing I did was lie. I let them think I was still deeper under than I was, just for one day. I needed that one day to think, because the moment they knew I was awake, Rachel would know too, and whatever she was planning to sign would either accelerate or vanish, and I needed to know which one before I tipped my hand. That night, a night nurse named Grace, I will never forget her name, was doing rounds. I managed, with a throat that felt like sandpaper, to whisper one sentence to her. "Don't tell my wife I'm awake. Call Dennis Marsh. Tell him it's urgent." Grace looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded and quietly stepped out of the room. Part 5. Dennis. Dennis had been my business partner since the second truck. He arrived within the hour, still in the clothes he'd clearly been sleeping in, and when he saw my eyes open, he didn't say anything for a full 10 seconds. He just gripped my hand like he was making sure it was real too. I told him everything I'd heard, every word. Dennis went pale, and then he told me something that turned the entire room upside down. He'd already had a bad feeling. 3 weeks earlier, right after the accident, Rachel had called him asking oddly specific questions about the company's valuation, our supplier contracts, and whether Dennis had signing authority independent of mine. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. Grief makes people ask strange questions, he told himself. Now we both understood it wasn't grief. It was due diligence. Part 6. Building the case. Here's the part I need you to understand. I could have simply woken up, confronted her, and let this become a shouting match in a hospital room. It would have felt good for about 4 minutes. It would have accomplished nothing. Instead, Dennis and I spent the next 3 days, while I was still officially unconscious to everyone but Grace, Dennis, and one very quiet neurologist who agreed to help buy us time, building a paper trail. Dennis pulled every email Rachel had sent to Peter Kessler, every draft power of attorney document, every communication with the outside buyer, a man named Aaron Voss, who ran a competing logistics firm 2 counties over, who Rachel had, it turned out, been having dinner with since roughly the 4th month of our marriage. Peter Kessler, to his credit, had been stalling her the entire time. He'd flagged the timeline as unusual. He'd insisted on a second medical opinion before finalizing anything. That single act of professional caution, the thing Rachel had been furious about, was the reason there was still time to stop this at all. I found out later that the sale, had it gone through, would have transferred 60% ownership of the company to Aaron Voss for roughly a third of its actual valuation. Rachel would have walked away with a payout, a new relationship already in motion, and a husband who, in the scenario she was betting on, either never woke up or woke up too damaged to notice what had happened to everything he'd built. She had already looked at apartments. We found that later, too. Part 7. The Reveal. On the 4th day, I asked Grace to let Rachel know I was awake. I watched her face when she walked in. I want to tell you it was guilt. It wasn't. It was recalculation. I could see her adjusting in real time to a variable she hadn't planned for. "You're awake," she said, and her voice cracked in a way that 3 days earlier I would have believed completely. "I've been awake for 4 days," I said. I watched every ounce of blood leave her face. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. Dennis was already in the hallway with Peter Kessler and, as of that morning, a lawyer I'd retained independently, someone with no history with either of us, someone whose only job was to make sure that every document Rachel had attempted to push through was declared void on the grounds that I had, in fact, retained legal awareness and had never granted the power of attorney she'd been racing to finalize. The power of attorney was never signed. Peter's stalling saw to that. The sale to Aaron Voss collapsed within a week, once his own backers discovered the deal was built on a foundation that no longer existed. Part 8. What she lost. I filed for divorce 11 days after I was discharged. Rachel fought it, briefly, until her own lawyer explained to her exactly how bad the emails looked in front of a judge, timestamps that placed her relationship with Aaron Voss well before my accident, recorded conversations about the timeline, and a paper trail Dennis had preserved with a thoroughness I will be grateful for the rest of my life. She didn't get the company. She didn't get the house. I'd bought it before we married, and the paperwork, unlike our marriage, had never been ambiguous. She got what the prenup she'd insisted was just a formality actually entitled her to, which was considerably less than what she'd been counting on. The company survived. Dennis and I rebuilt what the near sale had shaken loose, and 18 months later we were doing better than we had been before the accident, not despite what happened, but because it forced us to finally formalize protections we should have had in place years earlier. People ask me sometimes if I regret marrying her. I don't, not really. I regret not listening to the small, quiet questions that didn't add up along the way. The valuation questions. The dinners that ran a little long. The way she looked at the business less like a life I'd built and more like an asset she was managing. But I don't regret the coma. I know how strange that sounds. I don't regret the 19 days of nothing or the 4 days of lying still and listening. Because in the one moment she thought I could never hear her, the one moment she thought there was no one left to answer to, she showed me exactly who she was. And that's the version of her I believed.